In this video, I'll be going over why and how diseases run in families, and how different genetic traits follow predictable patterns based on where the gene is located, autosome or sex chromosome, and whether it is dominant or recessive. And that was our dog. For a quick overview, genes are passed down from parents through gametes, which are the sperm, and the ova, which are both haploid cells. They carry one copy of each chromosome and during fertilization form a diploid organism.
This is why in humans we have 22 pairs of numbered chromosomes, which are autosomes, and one pair of sex chromosomes, either XX or XY, for a total of 46 chromosomes.
Now, let's dive into some examples of autosomal inheritance, which involve genes on the non-sex chromosomes, autosomes. In this autosomal dominant genetic disorder, we have achondroplasia, a genetic condition that causes dwarfism. Achondroplasia is caused by a specific mutation in the FGFR3 gene. This gene normally slows down bone growth, but the mutation causes it to be overactive, which then suppresses bone growth.
Because genes are copied during reproduction, in this dominant example, once the mutation is going to be present, it can be passed down again and again throughout each generation. Only one copy of the mutated gene is needed to have the condition. So, for example, let's draw out a Punnett square of somebody who has achondroplasia mating with another person who doesn't. If they have achondroplasia, they would, and I will just be using the letter A, have the heterozygous form, which is AA. And if they were to mate with someone who is just of normal stature and who doesn't have achondroplasia, they would have the homozygous dominant version, which is AA, both capital. So I'll just fill in the chart here. AA, 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 and you can see that their offspring will have a 50% chance of being normal stature as well, with the homozygous dominant AA with another 50% chance of also developing achondroplasia.
Something important to note is that if two mutated copies of homozygous achondroplasia are inherited, that is always going to be fatal for the offspring. If we were to figure out the potential outcomes for the baby if two people with achondroplasia, AA, were going to mate, their offspring would have a 25% chance of being normal stature homozygous dominant, 50% heterozygous having achondroplasia, and 25% chance of death. Inheriting homozygous achondroplasia, typically in dominant traits, this will appear in every generation. Because both sexes can be affected by achondroplasia, this is not a sex-linked trait. Dominant autosomal traits are not like recessive ones, since in recessive inheritance, someone can be a carrier of a mutated gene without showing any symptoms of the mutation. A recessive disease might skip generations. Two mutated copies are needed, one from each parent, for the mutation to be present in the offspring. An example of this can be shown with cystic fibrosis, an inherited disease caused by a recessive allele. When drawing a Punnett square of two carriers of the recessive allele, you can determine the chances of cystic fibrosis in their offspring. Now let's see some examples of sex-linked inheritance revolving around the genes on sex chromosomes X or Y. Because both males and females have an X chromosome, there are X-linked recessive disorders and X-linked dominant disorders. In X-linked recessive disorders, they typically affect males because they only have one X chromosome. Females have two X's and are carriers, and these X recessive disorders will be inherited from carrier mothers to male offspring. An example of an X-linked recessive disorder is hemophilia, a blood clotting disorder. because a male only has one X chromosome, if they inherit an X that has a mutation, they will have hemophilia. Let's draw out an example. If a mom is a carrier of hemophilia XHXH and the father is normal and not a carrier XHY, female offspring will have a 50% chance of also being a carrier, but another 50% chance of just not being affected. However, male offspring would have a 50% chance of not having hemophilia, but have another 50% chance of being affected by hemophilia. An example of an X-linked dominant disorder is Rett syndrome, a rare neurological disorder primarily affecting females caused by a mutation on the MECP2 gene located on the X chromosome. According to the International Rett Syndrome Foundation, Rett syndrome can lead to a loss of motor skills, loss of speech, and is usually noticeable in early childhood around 6 to 18 months. Rett syndrome is X-linked dominant, which means only one mutation on the X chromosome can cause it. This syndrome mainly affects females, since males with the mutation do not survive due to having no backup X chromosome. For Y-linked inherited disorders or traits, these are very rare and affect only males, since only males have Y chromosomes. Y-linked genetic disorders are passed from male carriers to sons and are unable to be carried by females. This will never skip generations unless there are no sons, and the concept of dominant and recessive does not apply because males only have one Y. Let's say the father has a Y-linked trait and the mother does not. Mothers don't even have Y chromosomes, so they can't carry or pass Y-linked traits. Daughters never inherit Y-linked traits because they get an X from dad, not the Y. Understanding how traits and diseases are passed down through families isn't just science, it's practical. Whether it's a condition like hemophilia, Rett syndrome, or Y-linked infertility, learning how inheritance works helps us recognize family health patterns, understand risks for ourselves and future children, and make informed health and reproductive decisions. People can work with genetic counselors to help them know the basics of dominant, recessive, X-linked, and Y-linked inheritance, and ultimately gain tools to understand why a disease runs in the family, who might be a carrier of a condition, and discuss options such as testing, treatment, and family planning.